Where are the female photographers? I was scrolling on Instagram the other day and I came across this post, and it was, legendary photographers holding a print of their most iconic photo. And it was actually really fascinating to see, the artists behind the photos, because we don't often shed light on the artist itself. And, photographers don't always get the recognition that they deserve. But, as I was scrolling to the end, I realized only 1 out of 10 photographers that were highlighted were female, were the women. And of course, we can't expect women to have the same kind of opportunities as men were able to have, due to societal exclusion from the education and the arts. However, there are phenomenal women photographers out there, and we just don't highlight them. I mean, myself included, I actually don't know a lot of women photographers, and so I decided to take it upon myself to, do my own version of this and to highlight 10 iconic photos taken by women. I also even picked up a women's street photographer's book the other day, and it is incredibly fascinating, but maybe I'll do another video on that. But anyways, let's get into it. The first photographer we have on this list is Julia Margaret Cameron. She is most notably known for her portraiture during the 1800s. Yeah, she didn't even pick up a camera until she was 48 years old. And before that, she was a housewife, and she was deeply immersed in art, poetry, literature, but she was never formally trained. And so when she did start making photographs, she had a strong foundation. And if you look at her portraits, they are unlike anything at the time. It was very soft, spiritual, and painterly. This is her most iconic photo, the portrait of Sir John Herschel, taken in 1867. So the backstory behind this is that Herschel was a scientist and also a family friend, but Julia photographed him with biblical intensity, with wild hair, dramatic lighting, and it was almost prophet-like. And the reason this photo is so iconic is because she really elevated photography into high art, making it feel closer to the Renaissance painting rather than, a very stiff Victorian portrait. The second photographer I want to highlight is Dorothea Lange. She's most known for her work from the Depression era, so this was around the early 1900s. She believed that photography was, a tool for social change and not just art. So she was working for the Farm Security Administration, and she traveled across America documenting the struggles of the Great Depression. And this is her most iconic photo, and you might actually recognize this. It's called The Migrant Mother, taken in 1936. And so the backstory behind this is that in a California pea pickers camp, Dorothea noticed a mother and her children. The family had been surviving on frozen peas and the birds that the kids had caught themselves, and Dorothea felt compelled to take their portrait. The reason this photo is so iconic was because it became the image and the face of the Depression era, influencing relief policy and showing the power of photography to move governments. So the third photographer I want to highlight is Berenice Abbott. She's a street and documentary photographer, most notably known for her documentation of New York City in the 1930s. She started out as Man Ray's assistant in Paris, who is an American visual artist. But yeah, she really believed that photography could shape how people understood progress and modernity. And so this is her most iconic photo. It's called Night View. It was taken in New York in 1932. And so the backstory behind this is that she climbed a skyscraper. She photographed Manhattan, glowing with all this electric light, and the city felt so alive. And this photo is so iconic because it really transformed New York into a symbol of modern progress, the city of the future. It offered a perspective of excitement in American technological innovations, really highlighting that transition into modernity. And that's why this photo is so significant. So the next person on this list is Ilse Bing, and she was kind of an avant-garde photographer in the early 1900s. She had actually gave up art history to pursue photography as a career. She had become the first to fully embrace a Leica camera. And during this time, Leica had actually been able to innovate a camera where photographers could operate a camera free-handedly, so without the use of tripods, and it really allowed for many photographers, including Ilse. And so this allowed her to, shoot completely handheld, experiment with really bold, unusual angles, bold compositions that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to achieve with, a standard tripod. This really changed the craft of photography, allowing others to be more free and fleeting in their photographs. So this is her most iconic photo, and it is the self-portrait with Leica, taken in 1931. This was kind of a symbol of modern photography at the time, her claiming the space as both the subject and the creator. And it was really iconic because it represented freedom and experimentation and, pushing photography into the modernist era. During this time, photography was more recognized as an art rather than just documentation, and that's why this photo was so interesting. The next photographer I want to highlight on this list is Margaret Bourke-White. And she's a photojournalist and a war correspondent in the mid-1900s. And she had worked for Life magazine, and she was often the only woman in spaces dominated by men. From steel factories to war zones, she became one of the first female war correspondents, photographing anything from World War II to India's partition. This is her most iconic photo, and it is Gandhi at his spinning wheel, taken in 1946. Gandhi had allowed her to photograph him reading beside his spinning wheel, and it's a powerful symbol of self-reliance. It's an important photograph because this was taken just months before his assassination. This photo came to represent Gandhi's philosophy and India's fight for independence. The next photographer on this list is Lee Miller, and she is a surrealist and war photographer. She had actually began as a Vogue model and a muse for Man Ray himself, and then she became a surrealist photographer, and then later reinvented herself as a frontline war correspondent. She was one of the very few women that were actually out on the fields during World War II, and she had photographed everything from combat to the liberation of concentration camps. This is her most iconic photo, and it is a self-portrait in Hitler's bathtub, taken in 1945. Now this was kind of crazy to me because I was reading the backstory and I was like, what? This photo was taken on the day Hitler died, and Miller had entered his abandoned apartment in Munich, Germany, and she was still covered from the mud from the Dachau concentration camp, and she had photographed herself bathing in his tub. You can see her muddy boots left on the bath mat. The reason this photo is so iconic is because it's, part defiance, part surrealism, and it's also part of a historic record. And so this single image is so powerful, and it just kind of embeds all of this personal experiences and the fall of fascism. The next photographer on this list is Helen Levitt, and she is an amazing street photographer. And Helen often wandered the streets of New York with her Leica, and she was especially drawn to children in their playful worlds. Her photos were often lyrical, quiet, and just straight up beautiful. Her most iconic photo is New York children with chalk drawings, taken in 1939. And so the backstory behind this was, she captured kids in Harlem drawing, these whimsical chalk scenes on sidewalks. And these are just like little works of art that were so temporary. She was able to appreciate and preserve this, very innocent moment in time. And I love it, and it showed the resilience and the imagination of these working class kids, transforming and highlighting the ordinary into something magical. The next photographer on this list is Diane Arbus. She was a portrait photographer who was drawn to photographing people of marginalized communities. And so this would include circus performers, trans communities, nudists, and her goal was to photograph them with honesty. Her portraits weren't always flattering, but they were deeply human. And so this is her most iconic photo. It's called The Identical Twins, taken in Roselle, New Jersey in 1967. And so the backstory behind this was that two girls were standing in their matching dresses, and one is smiling faintly and the other is frowning, and their eerie symmetry was a little bit unsettling. And this photo is iconic because it became a cultural symbol of the uncanny, redefining what portraiture could reveal about identity. The next photographer is Nan Goldin, and she often liked to document LGBTQ plus activism in the mid-1900s. She had often photographed her own life and the lives of her friends, her lovers, and queer communities. Her work is very raw and very personal, and it's kind of like flipping through someone's diary. And I'm a huge fan of, snapshot photography, photographs from daily life. In her work during the AIDS crisis, her photos became this record of love, loss, and survival. And this is her most iconic photo. It's called Nan and Brian in Bed in New York City, taken in 1983. And this is actually a portrait of herself and her partner Brian. When you look at this photo, you can see there's a lot of tension and a bit of distance. The reason this photo is iconic is because it kind of broke away from stage photography and really realistically showing intimacy in all of its beauty and pain. And overall, this is just such a beautiful photo, but at the same time, there's this deep sense of sadness and disconnection within it. I think my favorite quote that comes from Nan is, "My work comes from empathy and love." I've been thinking a lot about that lately, about how photography is such a reflection of who you are, and if you photograph things with your heart, your work will become so much more personal and vulnerable. And that's what I really admire about Nan's work, and not just hers, but anyone that continues to photograph anything important and meaningful to them. The last photographer I want to highlight is Cindy Sherman, and she is more of a conceptual photographer, and she became famous for her untitled film stills, but she quickly transformed herself into different archetypal women, housewives, actresses, strangers in the city. She often critiques how women are portrayed in the media. She literally represents herself in these images, and this is one of them. One of her most iconic photos is the untitled film still, number 21, and this was taken in 1978. She's posed as a young woman in a very urban scene, and it seems as if she is caught mid-thought, very confident but vulnerable, and it feels like a frame from a movie that doesn't exist. And the reason this photo is so iconic is because it kind of blurred the lines between photography, cinema, performance, and cementing photography as conceptual art. And there's a quote from her that probably encapsulates her photography as a whole. And she says, "I didn't want to make what looked like art. I wanted to make what looked like life." Of course, this isn't a complete list of women photographers. Far from it. In fact, while I was researching, I realized most of the names that came up were often white American women, and there's a whole conversation to be had about race, class, and access to art. I definitely want to do my part to learn more about women photographers of color. The truth is, photography has always been dominated by men. You see it in history, you see it now, and most of the big name photography influencers today are men. And this is why it's so important to highlight women photographers, queer photographers, photographers of color. And photography is all about perspective, and if we ignore all these marginalized voices, then we're only telling, a fraction of a story. But some things to think about, and some things for me to think about. But I thoroughly enjoyed learning more about these women photographers, and I hope you did as well. But that's it for this video, and I'll see you in the next one.